Sorry, that wasn't a cue. Yeah.
But if you want to discuss it more in detail, we can pull it and have a discussion too.
And you will help me remember to do that, I'm sure.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Well, we have a quorum. It's 7 o'clock. Shall we open the meeting?
Yes. Let's open the meeting. And are we live on YouTube?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Well, certainly the recording started and we've got our audience.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay.
Great. Let me bring up my my agenda so I don't get anything wrong. Welcome to the July Transportation Commission meeting. Ms. Plaus, could you take roll?
Absolutely. Commissioner Del Rosario is absent. Commissioner Javendal?
Present.
Commissioner Peng?
Present.
Vice Chair Graham is also absent. And Chair McCroskey?
Present. Thank you. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lejeune. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and to together build a better future for all that now make this their home. And with that, I'm going to close our item number 1, move to item number 2, public comment. This is an item for persons who wish to address the commission on items that are not otherwise on the agenda this evening. We're not able to discuss these items, and we ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes each. In order to make comments tonight, we ask that you use the raise your hand feature on your phone or on your computer. And if I remember correctly, it's *9 on a phone, and the raise hand feature is at the bottom of your screen on a computer. Is there anybody who wishes to make a general public comment now at the beginning of the meeting?
Chair McCroskey, I'm not seeing any hands raised at the moment.
Terrific. Then we'll keep moving right along and get to our program. We'll move to item number 4. Oops, did that change? No. Okay. Item number 4 is the consent calendar. And I would like to pull item number 4.1. Do other commissioners wish to pull for discussion any other items?
No.
Seeing none, I will ask if members of the public wish to pull other items on the consent calendar.
Chair McCroskey, I'm not seeing anyone.
Agreed. So we will keep moving right along to item number 4.1. I found one correction in the minutes as drafted. Item number 6.1 had a description that was not appropriate to that particular item. Probably just got copied over. Are there any other comments from the commission on or questions, corrections to the minutes? All right, staff, help me out here. Can we fold this back into the consent calendar, or do we vote on it separately now?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm just now opening the minutes. I didn't have the document open. I'm sorry. What were the changes that you wanted to have to that?
The change is that item 6.1 has a description. So it has a title and a description, then a body. The description is obviously for some other item.
I see. So the action by the commission then would be to correct that description for item 6.1.
So it sounds like we vote on that separately.
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate.
All right. If there are no other corrections, can I get a move or a motion?
I move that we correct the minutes as noted by Chair McCroskey.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. I'm assuming no discussion at this time. And are we required to open this up for public comment?
Yes, sir.
So if there are any members of the public wishing to make comments on the agenda from our June meeting, now is the time to raise your hand. Seeing none, let's move right along. If there's no further discussion, seeing none, let's take a vote.
Commissioner Javindal,
Aye.
Commissioner Peng.
Aye.
Chair McCroskey.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Commissioner Javindal.
I was going to move approval of the remainder of the consent calendar, though you may wish to make some comments before I do.
I'm happy with you making a motion, but before we vote on that motion, I would like to make a comment about item number 4.3, which is a report from Dangerous by Design that notes a 4.5% increase in walking facilities in 2020 over 2019. This is part of a significant increase in all traffic fatalities that happened during the pandemic, despite much lower traffic miles traveled. They're estimating that in 2021, there will be an 11 to 13% increase in fatalities of pedestrians noted. And that's from some numbers that have been available. And that'll firm up later. And the report notes that speed is one of the most important factors in these fatalities. And I thought it was important to bring that to the note of both the commission and our public. Commissioner Peng?
Hi, I would like to make a note to item 4/2 about the asphalt art. In our last session, many people quoting regarding the just speeding and safety, and I think there are debates between residents of Albany. Should we put in more sign or should we not? You know, these are good recommendations to reduce the speed and increase people's awareness of the safety. So I find this online. This is by Bloomberg Philosophy. It's an interesting study. So it talks about a very cost-effective way, which is like applying arts on painted intersections. I think this will greatly engage families of Albany, especially family with kids, but that doesn't exclude anyone who are interested in art to paint on the intersection. That will call people's attention, and also this is a good chance to educate people of safety. And also I want to mention that I think there are many residents emailing saying when can they get the speed bump there. So I think there's a process. I will probably take some time. We have a limited budget and we have a certain process to follow. So maybe this is me just guessing, applying some painted intersection might be a faster and cheaper way. In other cities that I worked with, it's around like $5,000 to have each one done. And then based on online estimate, speed table is around $12,000. So that's just a reference. Don't quote me on that, but it's just my finding. And it's also, it's a very interesting report. I encourage everyone to read it. Thanks.
Thank you for bringing that to all of our attention. Appreciate it. We have a motion to approve the consent calendar of the remaining two items.
Second that.
Thank you. We don't need to take public comment on this. Ms. Plaus, could you take a roll vote?
Commissioner Javindal,
Yes.
Commissioner Peng,
Yes.
Chair McCroskey.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Terrific. That takes us to the end of the consent calendar and on to item 5.1 for discussion and possible action, the local road safety plan.
Yes. So I'm just bringing up our consultant, Corey Peterson, now. I think you all will remember Corey from his presentation to us last month, describing the draft emphasis areas of the local road safety plan. And he'll be telling us a bit more about the updated work on the plan so far. And I'll just note before he starts, he's going to be talking about some of the draft, the emphasis areas and also potential solutions. And we'll just note that we haven't gotten into any of the details for like specific locations yet. So we're still kind of thinking about this in a broader sense for this month. But I'll let Corey get into all the details there. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Michelle.
Great. Welcome, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Chair. Good to see everyone again. Let me get my screen share. Yep, there, that's the right one. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. Thanks again for having me back. It's good to see all of you here to talk about the local roadway safety plan. So I think what I'll do is I'll kind of run through a little bit on some of the stuff that we've talked about before for just a refresher. If anybody from the audience is listening for the first time, they can kind of see a little bit about what the project is and what we've been working on. I also wanted to touch on some additional collision analysis that we've done in response to both your comments and discussions we've had with city staff, kind of report back on that. And then overview the draft emphasis areas that were presented last time. And then we'll dig into, as Michelle mentioned, some of the countermeasures that we've been looking at and get your feedback on those. So as far as where we are in the process, we are starting to venture deeper into the into identifying specific countermeasures that we're going to be looking at. So that's kind of where we're at this point. The last step in the plan will be to develop safety projects. And like Michelle said, that's when we're going to start to get into specific locations, particularly the ones that we've identified as high injury in previous tasks. So I wanted to quickly go over some of the additional analysis that we've conducted over the last month or so. I believe this was summarized into a memo, was included in your agenda packet. So hopefully you had a time to take a look at it, but I'll just kind of go over some of the highlights. So these are kind of in response to discussions that we've had with Michelle and with Justin, and also based on some of the comments that we've heard from you all in our last meeting. So one change that we made to our proposed emphasis areas is we had proposed at the time to do improving intersection safety. We've since refined that to improve unsignalized intersection safety. After kind of digging into the data a little further, we were finding that a pretty large majority of collisions are actually happening at non-signalized intersections. So we revised that emphasis area to focus in a little bit more on these unsignalized intersections to try and address collisions that are happening there. We also looked a little deeper into some of the pedestrian and bicycle collisions that have been happening, particularly at what was causing them. So what we were finding is that for pedestrian collisions, they're primarily occurring in crosswalks and intersections. The data does have attributes that kind of tells you whether the pedestrian is crossing a crosswalk or was crossing mid-block, not in a crosswalk. In other words, they were jaywalking, or whether they were otherwise in the road. We found that for the most part, pedestrians have been crossing in crosswalks when they've been hit, and then for the most part, vehicles violating pedestrian right-of-way has been causing these pedestrian collisions, as well as 21% that were caused by a pedestrian violating a vehicle's right-of-way. Bicycle collisions, we didn't see a very clear trend as to what was causing bicycle collisions specifically. The highest category was an automobile right-of-way violation, which indicates that the bicycle violated the vehicle's right-of-way. That was 18%. So the categories are pretty mixed, not a super one clear trend of any one category. For the most part, the party at fault in the accident was proceeding straight. So this wasn't, for the most part, cars that were making turns. Most of them are proceeding straight on a segment We're also seeing that they're all occurring at intersections, or at least within 250 feet of one. We also dove a little bit into nighttime collisions, kind of looking specifically at pedestrian collisions to whether trying to identify whether there's a lot of pedestrian collisions occurring in low light conditions. But what we found is that the percentage of pedestrian bike collisions is relatively relatively consistent with the percentage of nighttime collisions happening among all modes. So we didn't see a huge increase in that for pedestrian and bicycle collisions specifically. One request I know specifically came from this commission was to look specifically at the difference between intersection collisions that occur within the 250 feet methodology, which is what we've been doing on this LRSP and what is utilized for the Highway Safety Improvement Program grant from Caltrans, and changing that to a methodology that only considers collisions that happen directly at an intersection, or is basically coded as 0 feet from intersection. So as you can see, for the most part, with the 250 feet methodology that we've been using on the plan, pretty much all collisions happen at intersections. When we looked only at 0 feet methodology, we're seeing, still a lot of intersection collisions is still the majority, but you can see that there's a pretty big difference between the two. So next, I'll kind of wanted to go over update on the community comments coming in from the project website. So as of a couple of days ago, we had been up to 480 responses. If I remember correctly, we were somewhere around 420 or 30 last time. So we've increased by about 50 or 60 in the last month. Here's a summary of the comments we've been seeing. For the most part, the categories in terms of the most common categories haven't changed much. Still seeing a lot of comments on visibility and lighting, on speeding and intersection safety, bike and ped safety. Also a lot of comments on Solano and Marin and San Pablo. One thing that was requested, though, is that we kind of compare some of the biggest concerns that we're seeing and compare it to the traffic data. So, for example, the category that residents are most concerned about was like visibility and lighting, or driving through curves. We're seeing that it's pretty consistent with the number of collisions that we're seeing at night. Similarly, 20% of collisions citywide were caused by unsafe speed. We're seeing roughly the same percentage of comments coming in about speeding. Again, and also bicycle pedestrian safety ranked pretty high on the list, where we're seeing 44% of our KSI collisions involving a pedestrian or bicyclist. So what we're seeing is that the data that's coming in is relatively consistent with what we're seeing on, in terms of percentages for what types of collisions are occurring. I will say that, for the concern of visibility and lighting being the top concern among residents comparatively to the percent of nighttime collisions, might be a little high, but for the most part, we're seeing, relatively proportionate, the data kind of matching with what we're seeing from the community. So just to kind of, this is just all refresher, wanted to pull up the high injury network maps one more time, just to kind of remind you what intersections and segments were included. And so you can see that San Pablo right through the city was the highest scoring, that was the highest scoring segment. But actually I was referring to San Pablo at Garfield as the highest scoring intersection, whereas the highest scoring segment was Solano Avenue. We also prepared a short bicycle and pedestrian high injury network, where San Pablo I'm sorry, my office overlooks a street that people obviously love to speed, so I guess we better get working on addressing that. Anyway, so San Pablo at Brighton was our number one intersection, and then we also are looking at San Pablo as the top segment for bicycle and pedestrian collisions as well. Draft emphasis areas. Again, this is what we were presenting on last time. We updated the intersection safety to unsignalized, and the rest of them we're looking at broadside collisions, rear end collisions, addressing improper turning violations, addressing bicycle and pedestrian safety, and improving collisions on San Pablo Avenue. All right, so now I've kind of gotten through that. Let's talk about some of the new stuff. So since we last met with you guys, we've started to develop what we call a countermeasure toolbox. And this is where we start to identify specific engineering and non-engineering solutions that we think would help to address collisions at the high injury network locations kind of on a broad scale. There's 3 different types of countermeasures. These are countermeasures that can be used to apply for the Highway Safety Improvement Program grant from Caltrans. They're divided into signalized intersection countermeasures, non-signalized, and then roadway segment countermeasures that are intended to be for locations that are away from intersections. So starting with the signalized intersections, our recommendations are focusing around adding lighting or improving the signal hardware and upgrading the timing. Also looking at if you have a signal that is pedestal mounted, converting it to a mast arm or providing a protected left turn phase. Also putting in striping improvements or putting in advanced stop bars before the crosswalk that could be used as a bicycle box, as well as implementing a leading pedestrian interval, which essentially lets the pedestrian cross a few seconds before cars start to go so that they're more visible as cars start to proceed through an intersection. This kind of gives you a visual of what these improvements might look like. When we talk about signal hardware upgrades, we're mainly talking about putting in like new backplates or lenses, or if you have the small lenses that are typical on older signals that are 8 inches, upgrading them to 12-inch to make them a little more visible. Caltrans has been doing these retroreflective borders a lot, as have many cities across the Bay Area. So installing those retroreflective borders on the backplate to help it be more visible at night. Improving pavement friction can help in wet road conditions, helping to bring drivers to a stop in slippery conditions. Providing a protected left turn phase. If you have a location that has a left turn yield on green, that can help to try and reduce rear end and broadside collisions. Installing raised pavement markings to help guide drivers through an intersection. Bicycle boxes, and then leading pedestrian intervals, which again is when you basically allow the pedestrian to cross a few seconds early before the cars start to proceed through an intersection. For unsignalized intersections, these were primarily focusing on a lot of signing and striping improvements, putting in some lighting, also considering mini roundabouts, and looking at installing flashing beacons either at or in advance of an intersection. Improving sight distance. In some cases, improving sight distance is a pretty low-cost countermeasure that can have a pretty big impact, especially if your sight distance is, trimming down some trees, bushes or trees that can help drivers to see as they're turning out onto a major street. Putting in some raised medians or splitter islands that help to kind of channelize traffic and discourage unsafe turning movements. Raised medians for refuge islands as well for pedestrians, and putting in those rectangular rapid flashing beacons. Again, some more visuals to help you visualize what these improvements would look like. In unsignalized intersection improvements, focus on a lot of signing and striping improvements, as well as some, concrete type improvements or hardscape like refuge islands and raised medians, but also putting in a lot of new pedestrian crossings, upgrading signs, particularly larger ones if it's on an arterial with high speeds, and upgrading the intersection pavement markings. And then lastly, for the roadway segment countermeasures, here we're looking at installing lighting, or if there's areas where there could be a road diet, reducing travel lanes down to 3 and putting in bike lanes, adding in separated bike lanes, upgrading pedestrian crossings, either mid-block as well as the RRFBs again, and installing object markers, which can help with hit object collisions. Upgrading signs with retroreflectivity is also a really important one. It's definitely, it's one of those things where, like, you know, it's a really kind of like, it's not a huge flashy project, but it's one that's really effective. It's needed to go through and check all your signs and figure out how reflective they are. Can they be seen well at night? That can help to increase visibility of, you know, like intersections and people approaching various features to be able to see what's coming up at night. Like I said, road diets to help to install bike lanes, and also can narrow down lane widths as well. Installing large object markers, helping with drivers for hit object collisions, as you know, put them on telephone poles or trees to help drivers see fixed objects before they reach them. And then ped and bike improvements include, you know, mid-block crossings, as well as those RFBs, and installing separated bike lanes. For non-engineering strategies, and I know I kind of went over some of these a little bit last month with our emphasis areas, but a lot of it is looking at what can we do for public information campaigns or bike and ped safety campaigns, particularly Safe Routes to School programs that can help to kind of educate drivers, and also kind of, you know, have like those information campaigns, like, you know, a lot of like CHP does a lot of, you know, anti-drunk driving campaigns, you know, or texting while driving campaigns. I also included implementing some tactical urbanism projects as well. That's a great way to kind of educate drivers and pedestrians on using facilities that might be a little bit new to the area. Also a great way to build community, doing like a public art project. I know that was something that had been requested from the commission at the last meeting, so we wanted to make sure to include that as well. Enforcement could be targeting enforcement at particular locations if we know there's particular types of collisions occurring. And then for that, and for EMS, for emergency response, to increase first responder training. So with that, what I'd like to do is I just wanted to kind of pose a question to the commission that maybe could help to focus the discussion. So what we're looking for myself and staff as well is kind of like, what improvements should we be focusing on? So I've kind of thrown a lot of different improvements at you guys, but I kind of wanted to get a sense of, you know, is there a particular type of improvement that we should be focusing on? Should we focus a lot more on like pedestrian improvements, like the RFBs? Should we look at more lighting, signing improvements, or striping? I think that, you know, this is kind of what we're seeing based on the data, based on what we've seen from the community. We want to get your guys' feedback on what you would like to see prioritized kind of on a broader scale citywide. So I will end my presentation there, answer any questions, and open it up for commission discussion. Great.
We will start out by asking you some questions, and then we'll open it up to public comment. We'll take public comment all at once. And then commissioners have the option to pick up questions that the public raised and ask those questions. So it's kind of our process, as you probably remember. And before I hand it off to other commissioners who questions, can I get a clarification in your emphasis area 1 slide? I was having a little trouble with the terminology. Can you give us an example? Well, you talked about pedestrian violations and also pedestrian right-of-way violations. I think those are two very different things.
Yes. So pedestrian right-of-way violation is when the right-of-way belongs to the pedestrian and the vehicle violates it. So for example, that could be a pedestrian crossing in a crosswalk, and the pedestrian clearly is far ahead into the intersection, has the right-of-way. The car has to yield to the pedestrian, but does not. A pedestrian violation is when the pedestrian violates a vehicle's right-of-way. And one example off the top of my head would be a car, like a pedestrian tries to cross mid-block and basically just walks right in front of a car. for example, when the car had the right of way in that situation. That's what the difference is.
Okay, so the second one is just a sort of a shorthand for pedestrian right of way vehicle violation.
Yeah, so essentially it's just who violated whose right of way is the difference.
Okay. I will remember that this time, but the closeness makes it a little fuzzy for me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other commissioner questions? Commissioner Peng.
Hi. Thanks, Mr. Peterson. I think that's a really good report. Just want to get a clarification. So you mentioned 22% of the public comments is about visibility, lighting, and curves. Can you remind me of the question you put in the questionnaire on the website? How do you describe this item?
So in general, this item would include comments related to, visibility at intersections while turning. It could be sight distance issues. It could be, issues of lighting at night potentially. There are some situations where, cars felt unsafe driving on curves as well. That's kind of the high level, at least. It's primarily sight distance and lighting issues.
Mr. Peterson, I'm sorry, I got to interrupt you. You're saying motorists felt uncomfortable on curves. The cars themselves probably didn't feel uncomfortable.
Fair enough.
Okay, I'm sorry, I had to interrupt on that one.
Fair enough.
So thank you. So that's actually my question too. I mean, I was assuming that when people say I'm concerned about visibility, part of the concern is that they don't have a clear vision at the intersection, because in some of the intersections, if I remember right, there are still parked cars. So parked cars can have great impact on people's visibility, especially if the intersection is connecting to street at grade. So I didn't see that in your countermeasure. Maybe we should do a survey of not survey, but I don't know what the approach is, but take a look at the intersection in Albany and find out if we have cleared enough space for non-parking at the intersection. I think that's the most cost-effective way of increase visibility. And also, 1 second. I look at the countermeasure too. I think recently I read good report, convincing data showing the effectiveness of traffic camera for different benefits. I didn't see that in your countermeasure, so I'm wondering why.
So to the first point about the sight distance, yes, that red curbing is something that we can do using a sight distance countermeasure, which we've included. So that's something that we can definitely be looking at, is if there's opportunities for red curbing at some of these locations to help increase sight distance. As far as the second question, you said that
traffic camera. So basically, whenever people speed, so they just automatically around a red light, they automatically take the plate number and send them a bill. Okay. I think what I read is in New York, they effectively reduced a lot of speeding and traffic violations. And then also they made a lot of money out of it for the city.
Right. Let me look into that on red. You're talking about red light cameras or speeding?
Let me, I'll probably will pass it to the city. Is there any way for me to pass you some literature and reports, things like that? I can send it to you.
Okay, that'd be great.
Commissioner Penn, you can send that to me or Justin, and we can forward it along.
Sure.
Oh, okay.
That'd be great.
All right. Thanks, Michelle.
Let me just add here that we have a long-term project in Albany to daylight the corners of intersections and increase the red space to a better standard that we've been rolling out slowly over the city. So that's actually an ongoing effort already here that you might not be familiar with, Commissioner Payne.
Thank you.
Commissioner,
we'll look into those. Into the red light and speeding cameras. I'm pretty sure off the top of my head the speeding cameras are not legal in California, but I need to double check that to make sure. But if it's the obviously red light cameras, we can definitely look at that. But I think speeding cameras are not legal in California.
Sorry for stepping in. Commissioner Javadal, do you have questions?
I don't think I have any questions, but I will just chime in. I know for certain that speed cameras are not legal in California. The Assembly bill to contemplate making them legal in a limited number of cities died in commission, was never voted on by the state legislature last time. So that's something that if we were interested, we could advocate for, but it's not an option at this time.
Great. My questions start with thank you for analyzing the zero intersection collision data. And it turns out to be about 40% versus 60% in intersections. That's pretty sizable. Now I'm curious. I understand that the Caltrans specifications are pretty specific, and that's great. But not all the grants apparently we would be applying to are under those rules. And I think we'd love to have a better understanding of, where intersection treatments are prioritized versus where mid-block treatments should be prioritized. I guess my next question on that, in that vein, is there a logical breakdown point? Is there a preponderance of 20-foot or 30-foot close to intersection accidents, where most of the accidents are recorded as happening? So let me throw that one in there as a next step. Thank you for analyzing the community input and providing aggregate information, and that's great, and gives us an idea of what people really care about. I'm wondering if the report will include additional data, things like locations where the public data is specific about concerns that don't show up in the statistical data, and whether the end report will have as an attachment the body of public input.
So in terms of the public inputs, yeah, we can look into that, see if that's something that can be pulled out, to see if we can pull out, maybe to better clarify and understand what I think you're asking. So you're asking basically for public comments for issues that may not be reflected in the observed data. So in theory, for example, on Solano Avenue, residents are concerned about lighting, but we don't see a lot of nighttime crashes on Solano. Is that what you're saying?
For example, yes. Or I noticed some dots in places that are completely different than what you have on the statistical data analysis map.
Okay.
And I think that's a large part of what I understand, that the Caltrans requirements are specific about the data that comes from the statistics, but as a city, I think we want to be cognizant of going a little bit beyond that and finding places that aren't showing up in the data.
Okay. Yeah, we can look into that. And then as far as sharing the entire body of comments, I'll leave that on to the city. We can discuss internally how we want to handle that.
Okay. I'm curious about some things that I didn't see as options in the mitigations. What about reducing lane width? What about reducing speed? Are those things that are not in the Caltrans toolkit?
So reducing lane width, I don't think is called out specifically, but even if it's not called out as a specific countermeasure per Caltrans, we can still put that, in the toolbox and in the report. We are bound somewhat to, include those countermeasures because that is kind of the format of the LRSP, but that does not preclude us from recommending other things too. So I will caution and say that a LRSP is not a traffic calming program. So it's not really intended to address speeding like on residential streets. We mostly focus a lot on arterials. That being said, there's nothing against, recommending, some, traffic calming and traffic calming solutions that could help to reduce speeds on some, higher speed roadways. And of course, some of the segments and the intersections that are on the high injury network here are residential streets. And so maybe traffic calming would be appropriate. So the answer is a lot of them aren't necessarily in the Caltrans list, but that doesn't mean we can't include it. So.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any last commissioner questions? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. We haven't had any public comment yet this evening, so I just want to remind people to use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. I see we have at least one person interested, and I'll turn it over to staff to manage the public comment.
Thank you, Chair. Jeremiah Garrett-Pinguel, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff Bond. And thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. Yeah, I did kind of have fun with that map. I was putting dots pretty much on Solano on every intersection. I drew lines actually around the schools and all of Solano. So the way I see it is we spend so much money and people don't really see any change. I mean, even the speed limit on Solano, we reduced the speed limit to what, 20 miles an hour? Still haven't seen signs yet. So when are we going to get signs? Let's say 20 miles an hour on Solano. I mean, we've got the 15 mile an hour recommended. How many are there? 2. But you can only see them going, what, down Solano? Or I'm sorry, west? Whatever you look at it. I just don't see a lot of implementation. I don't see any signs directing cars on what the rules are. And so I just sent Transportation Commission an email. Jeff, Mr. Bond, I'm going to start CCing him to you also. Sorry about that. I'll try better, I promise. You know what my solution is on Solano is, of course, we got to trim back that tree right at Gordo's. That tree, where's the arborist at? Our arborist should be focusing on safety first. I saw him today driving down Solano with a full pickup truck of maple leaves. I don't know. You know what? That might have been liquid amber leaves. But we need to get these trees maintained around our crosswalks, number one. That'll help with the lighting. It's just trees are blocking it. And Gordo's is such a hot intersection right there, people crossing. I don't see anybody doing anything about that darn tree. I would like to. And I just sent an email. We had a great presentation, by the way. Whoever that was really good. I really enjoyed that presentation. There was something about the state law stop sign in the middle of the street. I see one in Berkeley up there by Zachary's, or that bank. We need those state law stop for pedestrian signs at every single crossing on Solano. Crossing guards, but that's too much to maintain. We've got to keep paying crossing guards. So if we get those state law signs, we have to pay one fee and they last for 20 years. Please get more signs. Thanks.
Thanks for your comments. I'm not seeing any other members of the public with their hands raised. I'll wait just a moment here. No? Okay. With that, I will bring it back to the commission and ask for commissioner comments. I guess it's my turn then, seeing no other. So I would love to see the public comments analyzed a little further and have that raw information in the final report if that's possible. We already talked about including some of the traffic calming measures, at least on the slower streets and not the arterials. And looking a little bit at a little more closely at the difference between the intersection and inner block collision data and finding if there's maybe a happy median point to differentiate for our own purposes, if not for Caltrans. It's interesting that the public comment seems to prioritize concerns on Solano Avenue. I'm sure those aren't just entirely up to our recent public commenter. Most of the mitigations or areas of emphasis areas are focused on San Pablo Avenue. So there's a little bit of a dichotomy there. It's great to see this addition to the analysis, and appreciate you bringing it to us tonight. Are there any other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Peng, please.
Hi, one quick question. So the completion of this local road safety plan will enable Albany to different funding. Is that correct? Additional funding, and then the usage of that funding has to be linked to this study, correct?
So the LRSP would make the city eligible to apply for certain grants, one of which is the Highway Safety Improvement Program through Caltrans. But more recently, actually, MTC has started making it a requirement to be qualified for OBAG funds, which is the federal funds that get dispersed every few years, I think, to cities and counties throughout the Bay Area. So there's not funding specifically attached to the plan, but it does make the city eligible to go after such funding.
And then the countermeasure you listed, you listed them alphabetically, or is that a certain weight to it that you're thinking, the first one is more effective, or it's just random?
No, there wasn't a specific order to the countermeasures other than the countermeasure code that Caltrans assigns it. It was ordered in that sense, but no other way.
Okay, thanks. I don't have any other comment.
Thank you. Commissioner Javadal.
Thank you. Thank you for the good presentation. And I think while we didn't really go into much of a benefit cost discussion around the countermeasures, I think that's worth providing some additional guidance on with respect to both the installation cost and the maintenance cost. As Commissioner Peng mentioned, daylighting of intersections is a relatively low cost item with red curbing, and it lasts. And once you do it, it does stay around for a fair amount of time. You do eventually have to refresh the paint, but it's not getting knocked down or driven over, so that's more durable as compared to, for example, the in-road yield to pedestrian signs that, unless they're on a median or an otherwise protected area, tend to get knocked down a couple times a year, and at $300-400 a pop, your maintenance costs go pretty significant on those. So I think all of that would be really good information as we pursue funding and implementation, to have a little bit of guidance on there to help us kind of pick which things are going to get us the most bang for our buck and might be a good, quick strategy to roll out. But overall, yeah, everything that I've seen on the list looks good. And just wanted to, again, say thank you for the presentation.
Great, thank you. To maybe shed a little more light on the benefit cost aspect, we actually are going to be doing that later on. That's kind of our next step, is once we start looking at projects for specific locations, each project comes with a benefit cost ratio. So, and that's actually, we use the HSIP grant guidelines, but it could also kind of give you an idea of, based on what benefit crash reduction benefit you would get, this is where your money is like the best bang for your buck. So it could be useful for other things too.
Is that on a package basis or on individual countermeasures within the packages?
It's on a package. It's on a package basis. So the project would look something like it would have 2 or 3 of those countermeasures, and it would be applied at, say, like 10 intersections. And then we'd cost estimate all of them, add it up together, and then estimate the benefit cost of that project.
If I hear Commissioner Jamandal correctly, I think he's looking for maybe a little more granular detail or prioritization in terms of what we can prioritize within projects, or maybe if we have to reduce plans for projects, what should we prioritize?
I think that become part of the strategy of putting together the project packages, because if each of the countermeasures has a certain expected outcome statistically, that's what we're counting as the benefit. The cost is just what does it cost us to implement it? So structurally within this framework, that is something that's actually pretty easy to do. So if then the question, as Chair McCroskey mentions, is to sort of optimize what package we propose, then that's again part of what we need to figure out is how much funding are we likely to get, and something might have a great benefit to cost ratio, but if the actual cost is too high to be competitive, maybe we need to shoot for something that's more affordable and still gets us most of the benefit. So again, if there's any questions around that, a little bit of guidance would be good, but I recognize that some of the packages may seem pretty, straightforward and routine. If so, that's great. Otherwise, something that allows, the commission or council to sort of pick between options if you see that there are reasonable alternatives.
Okay. Yeah, we can look into that for sure.
Yeah, because the next part of the process is including these projects in actual planned projects, and certainly when we get to the ATP process, we're prioritizing a large number of projects over time, and we want to look for things where we can get the biggest bang for our buck. So yeah,
certainly,
absolutely. I found the data about night versus day interesting, and I'm willing to concede that Albany is probably like everywhere else in terms of proportion of people walking, biking, and driving in the day versus the night. I think you could say that more of the focus of walking at night is probably in our active downtown district on Solano. And maybe on San Pablo Avenues as well. Something to consider going forward.
Okay.
Any last comments from either commissioner? Great. Thank you so much for this update and further analysis and chance to give you feedback.
Thank you. Appreciate all your comments, and we'll keep plugging away.
Terrific. All right. With that, we're going to move on to item number 5.2, the Albany Sidewalk Repair Program.
Just brought up our associate engineer, James Torelli, who should be, there he is, and he'll be giving us a presentation.
Welcome.
We can't hear you, James.
I will be discussing the sidewalk program tonight. Can you see the presentation all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So tonight I'll be talking about the sidewalk repair program's critical repair list and our proposed plan through the next year. It's going to be kind of split into two, where the first half I'll briefly go through the critical repair list, recapping the survey that I described more in detail in the January commission meeting. And I'll kind of just map out where all those critical repair locations are for visualization. And then after I've established that, we'll kind of get into what we think is the most effective plan for repairing all these critical repair locations through 2023, and then hone in on the phase 6 scope that would start in this fall. So first, critical repair lists. So in January, I presented to the commission a summary of Beneficial Design's comprehensive sidewalk survey. So real quick, we did a full citywide sidewalk survey through Beneficial Designs. They kind of specialize in ADA compliance. It's completed last year, just before we went out for the phase 4 repair cycle. And their data consisted of shapefiles and Excel data for all those attributes, station data, which is just general line data on our sidewalk segments, but more importantly was the features data set. This is point data, so very detailed information on sidewalk issues at a particular XY location. And again, this was already presented in January 2022, so I'm not really going to get into it too much. I'm just going to kind of focus on the main data features for the sidewalk repair program, which are the no best path of travel feature, non-planar pedestrian access route feature, and briefly the vertical discontinuities. So in terms of the critical repair features, these are what Beneficial Designs kind of prioritize as some of the most hazardous issues and where we should focus our repairs. Recap: the no best path of travel is a point where we have at least 2 deficiencies. For example, we have a vertical discontinuity and a horizontal opening, or 2 different types of vertical discontinuities. And what we're labeled as a critical no BPOT is where, if in that category, if they have at least 1 2-inch or greater vertical discontinuity. Non-planar pedestrian access routes, this wasn't as discussed in January. We at the time didn't think it was as big of an issue compared to the no best path of travel, but we've had a lot more time since then to digest the data. And after reviewing it, we believe that this should be included as well. It generally is relating to where we're seeing tree upheaval. So the flag of concrete itself might be in good condition, but it's having a lot of cross slope or grade issues that make it very difficult to get through, especially for people with disabilities or mobility issues. And what we're considering in critical no PAR is where there's a 2-inch offset and greater than an 8.3% grade. This is the kind of ADA limit for what a ramp is allowed. And I just want to be clear, offset and vertical discontinuity, they are 2 different things. Vertical discontinuity is a 2-inch lift in the path of travel on the sidewalk, whereas because of the way that the no PARs look, it might go straight up, so you're not seeing that straight a very obvious discontinuity. So they're comparing it to the curb level. So the 2-inch offset for the no PARs is relative to the curb, where it should be, where should roughly conform. And another thing we did with this data set was I went out and checked all of the greater than 3-inch vertical discontinuity features. I wanted to double check that their data was, they were doing a good job at categorizing, bad vertical discontinuity as no best path of travel. For the most part, that was the case. There was a lot of, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but there's a lot of there's a pretty good amount greater than 3-inch, but they were very confined to the edge of sidewalk where you still have a best path of travel. About 5 of them I did reclassify. I think there was a little issue with when they categorized them, but otherwise they did a pretty good job at where we're seeing greater than 3-inch that was already classified as a no best path of travel if it was a critical issue. So to kind of help visualize what these features look like, the top is an example of a greater than 3-inch vertical discontinuity that I reclassified as a critical no best path of travel, because you're seeing a linear discontinuity here. You're seeing a non-planar pedestrian access restorer here with this flag lifted like that. And you're also seeing a greater than 2-inch vertical discontinuity here. So that's kind of an example of where this greater than 3-inch vertical discontinuity should have been classified as a critical no best path of travel, and we have since corrected that data. Critical no best path of travel, as you see there, we're seeing more than one issue here, and we're seeing at least a 2-inch vertical uplift, vertical discontinuity. And, as I mentioned, no PARs, no pedestrian access route. The flags of concrete generally are in pretty good condition, but it's tough to see from these photos, especially here, where this is actually an 18% grade. So this is pretty much impossible to navigate if you're using any kind of walking assistance device, or you're in a wheelchair, or even if you generally just have some limited mobility. This is a pretty difficult path to travel, even if it visually doesn't look like it. And that's a good example of why at first in the January 2022 review, this wasn't as closely considered, but since we've had more time to look in the data, now this is being pulled in as a critical repair locations. So to kind of compile the final critical repair locations list, so we took these categories, our desktop features, I called them, made a list and map, and we basically went out and field verified them. We wanted to make sure that Beneficial Designs was accurately categorizing these locations. I wanted to make sure that those measurements were correct. And in some cases, I wanted to remove them from the critical list if they were misclassified or they were already repaired. And so at the end of this process, we had our final critical repair list. And to clarify, that rationale for removal during field verification, and to be clear, when I say removal, it doesn't mean we're removing it from the database. We're just removing it as a critical location. If they were repaired during phase 4, or the property owner had since done a repair, they were misclassified, where you're not really, we measured out and we didn't see that 2-inch discontinuity or offset, or the grade wasn't as extreme as they had recorded in their data set. And the third reason would be if it's not feasible. This one was pretty rare. Generally, if there's a property owner attention, if there's an issue on the private side, beyond the back of sidewalk that needed to be fixed first, or within the right of way, for example, a private sewer lateral, the upper sewer lateral, if it was failing or they're having issues or it's leaking, we obviously don't want to come in and do the repair at this time until that's addressed, because it would begin failing again. And Albany Hill, there was 1 or 2 locations where the driveway, we wouldn't be able to make a compliant sidewalk because of the way the driveway, the private side of the driveway came into the right of way. We basically would have to redesign their driveway. That issue was pretty rare, but that is an example of kind of this needs of property owner attention for us to have a proper, clean, conform, and finish. So there is about 189 total critical repair locations. Majority of them are the no best path of travel feature. There's about 24 or those no pedestrian access route issues. And I say 189, but there's about 168 that would be repaired under this program. About 21 of them, we're looking at different projects that are already going here, that are going to capture those repairs. For example, if it's near a curb ramp conform during a paving project, we're doing curb ramp upgrades, we'll just get it. It's more feasible for us to do it then. Similarly, if there's a private, large private development going in and they're going to be redoing the sidewalks in a short period of time, we don't want to go in, fix them, and then have them demo and fix them, redo them again in a year or two. I also put this note at the bottom. In the past, we tracked repairs based on the property. Now we have this data set where we're basing it, we have GIS kind of locations, geographical locations on a map. So multiple issues might be at a single property, or one issue might extend two properties. Just there might be times when, at the end of a repair phase, we're saying we've done 50 repairs, but the project scope is 55 locations. This is kind of where you might see that discrepancy going forward, just because the database has these specific locations, but we're going to continue tracking it publicly the way we've done it in the past based on the property being repaired, property frontage being repaired. And the moment we're waiting for, the map of the critical repair locations. They're pretty well spread geographically. There's a bit more in the southeast side of the city, but generally they're quite spread evenly throughout the entire city. And I kind of want to point out, in the past, phases 1 through 3, and to some degree phase 4, we focused on the ATP priority sidewalk network. That was kind of the criteria that we put in because we needed a good approach to start with, because we had a city full of sidewalk issues, and that's kind of how we started it. And a recap is those sidewalks make up about 38% of our sidewalk network, but they accounted for about 64% of the repairs in those 4 phases. And prior to the 2020 zone shaving, they also accounted for 62% of our sidewalk shaving. And you'll generally see the ATP network is in a lot better condition from a critical repair standpoint. The only clusters where we are really seeing, some critical repairs on the ATP network is on portions of Jackson and Upper Marin. But otherwise, a lot of these critical repairs remain off the ATP network. So I think this is, we did a great job in the past, and we're doing a good job going forward with this prioritization criteria. So with the critical repair list there, the critical repair locations kind of explained there. I'm going to go into how we plan on addressing it through 2023. And then with that plan, hone in a bit more on the phase 6 specifics, since we're planning that to start this fall. So just generally, to just talk about the sidewalk program, we have our repair program. We have several different, criteria that kind of capture where we think, when a repair is necessary. And although we have this list here, we are still focusing on this critical repair list first. And, beyond our repair program, we have the shaving program. It's an annual, we do shaving annually, and then the city is divided into 5 zones. We do 1 zone per year for about $50,000 worth of shaving. And that targets less than 2-inch discontinuities, greater than 1/4 inch. And we always encourage homeowner repairs when they call in regarding the program, but we have a pretty clear line of where we can tell them we don't foresee your sidewalk being repaired under the program, because it's not either on the critical repair list and it doesn't really meet these criteria. And, with the sidewalk program and kind of the shift to the data-driven method, we're still prioritizing special access needs. We're doing this comprehensive database approach rather than the complaint-driven database that we had prior to phase 5. Phases 5 through 8, we're looking at the most hazardous repair locations, most accessible ones. And then after phase 8, we're kind of think it's appropriate to kind of rethink the prioritization criteria. That being said, phase 9 is probably would occur earliest is fall 2024. So after phase 5, if you hadn't heard, it has kicked off as of Monday. And after these phase 5 repairs and all the other repairs outside the program, we're looking at 116 critical locations in phase 6, 7, and 8. We've done a cost estimate, and we do have sufficient funding before we have more than sufficient funding before P1 sunsets to get all of these. So we definitely will be able to get all of these critical repair locations done under this program. There will be no issue with that happening. And in order to kind of tackle that, we're using the shaving program as a model a bit. The shaving program, the city is geographically divided into 5 zones, and we kind of use those limits to kind of scope out similar size repair phases. So phase 6, we're looking at zone 1 and 5. Phase 7, we're looking at 2 and 3, and phase 8, we're looking at 4. And to kind of visualize it, here's a map of it all. So phase 6, that would occur in this fall. We're looking at 30 critical repair locations between zone 1 and zone 5. Then spring of next year, we're looking at phase 7, 44 locations in zone 2 and zone 3. And then later 2023 in the fall, we're looking at 42 locations in zone 4, the southeast. And just, it might be a little difficult to tell, but the zones are split on the center line of a road. So here's San Pablo splitting here. Then we have Solano here. And we have Pomona here. So this is ultimately how we're looking through 2023 to get all these critical repairs done. Zone 1, 5, then go up to zone 2, 3, and then finish off in zone 4. So based on our fund balance and the expected funding in the next 2 fiscal years, we're looking at about $1.1 million of funding. Phase 5 with its contingency, and we've estimated phase 6, 7, and 8. This estimate takes into case contingency costs and inflation, and we're looking at just under $1 million to tackle all those. So we're definitely in the green. We have a $100,000 buffer with funding, and that's after considering contingencies and inflation. So as I mentioned, we have enough money, and this isn't all the sidewalk repair program money. It will still go for about 2 more fiscal years after we finish these critical repairs. So there's still money to continue this program, and there's plenty of money for us to get these really nasty locations done. So kind of honing in, that's the big approach. And to kind of hone in on what we're looking at in phase 6, we're doing zone 1 and 5. And we also have 3 special access needs issues that have come up that we will also be putting in this repair phase. Here's a list of the locations. 929 Cornell. This is just an approximate address. This is on the west side of Cornell Elementary. 1122 Masonic may be delayed. There's some coordination with a PG&E utility vault there. We need some adjusting to happen to get the repair done. We think we'll be able to get it done. We'll be able to coordinate that to have this all done together, but there's a chance this might get pushed back into phase 7. And similarly, we have a homeowner issue at Solano. We're trying to get the property owner to discuss it with us. If this is west of Pierce, if you're familiar on Solano there's a tree, but it's on the private side. We need to kind of discuss it with the property owner because as it stands, we're going to have a hard time doing the repair without some alterations there. So this one, although it's scheduled for phase 6 right now, it may be pulled as well. Kind of visualize this. We're looking about 1/3 of the repairs are within zone 1. That's west of San Pablo. And then the remaining are in zone 5. That's the east of San Pablo, south of Solano, west of Pomona, and then the 3 special access needs. There are some critical repair locations that are within zone 1 of 5 that aren't being addressed here in phase 5, and kind of talk through that. 948 Masonic, we basically have 2 utility volts at the base of a tree that's causing upheaval. We're trying to save the tree, so we're engaging PG&E, and we haven't found the right party on the other one. We think it's AT&T. We're going to see if they can relocate the utility volts. And if that's not the case, then we might have to go through pros and discuss the tree removal instead. So we won't have time to kind of get through that before phase 6. So that will be in a later phase. 1134 Santa Fe. Now this is actually, the repairs are more needed on Key Route. This is kind of that the triangle where Santa Fe and Key Route meet, that northern part of the intersection there. There's a lot of issues there, but more importantly is to get a good, clean repair, it would need to go through curb ramps, and that would trigger curb ramp upgrades. So we're looking at putting this in the paving project. These streets haven't been, to my knowledge, completely finalized to be put on an upcoming paving cycle. So we're discussing internally, and if paving's looking a long time out, in the short term, we'll do a small fix and fix what we can outside of the curb ramp limits. Dartmouth, this is within the curb ramp conforms of the Keynes Avenue paving coming up this fall. So we figured it would be better tackled under the paving project to minimize disturbance to the neighborhood and just generally have a better product so we're not breaking out twice. Similar here at 1122 Keynes. If you're familiar with the apartment complex on Keynes around the Berkeley border, there's a lot of issues with the curb and gutter, the driveways there, the sidewalk, tree upheaval, very large sidewalk repair. A lot of work needs to be done. We'll be paving there in fall and redoing the curb and gutter. So it just generally made more sense to be tackled under the paving program, because the paving program has a lot more of a budget to absorb these costs, because this would be very costly under the sidewalk program. And it's also more appropriate just because there's going to be curb and gutter work will conform into, and technically speaking, it's just easier to do under the paving project. So this again will be tackled in the fall Keynes Avenue paving. 1230 Marin, Evelyn, this is within the zone 5 repair area, but because it's close enough to Marin, we're going to cover it into the Marin paving happening in fall, just so we're not disturbing the residents twice. 507 and 509 Adams. This is actually right next to a phase 5 repair, but the Albany Bowl redevelopment is going to be messing around with these sidewalks. So we didn't think in the short term it would be very effective to repair these, only for them to likely have more work done on them in 2 years. That money would be better spent elsewhere in this program. And lastly, 752 and 1111 San Pablo. Caltrans has approached us last year. They have an upcoming ADA improvement project along this corridor. They plan on tackling these issues before we even call them out that these are critical repairs. And they're better to handle this because, we don't need to go through the Caltrans encroachment process. We don't need to pay extra for that. We don't have to get through their design review. And specifically at 11 San Pablo, that's actually at the Berkeley border. So we might have even had to involve Berkeley into this. So they're coming within the next couple of years to do this, and they're just the better party to have these repairs done. And it'll allow us again to put money in our local sidewalks as a result. So kind of the schedule for phase 6, we've more or less finished the tree review. Designs are being drafted in CAD and should be out in a couple of weeks, so we can get a September package to council for their approval. And depending how it goes, if we go the formal bid process, we'll be in construction at probably the end of November, potentially into December or January, depending on contractor vacation schedules. But we are considering option B. If the MC Corporation, who's doing the phase 5 repairs, if they're doing a pretty good job and there's a satisfactory performance there, we're considering bringing it to council as a change order so that they continue with the work, and we can get it as early as September started, right? Pretty much 2 weeks after their approval, we can start that construction. But again, that's contingent on them doing a good job with phase 5. So, summarized, I'm looking forward. Phase 6 through 8, we're repairing the most hazardous and most inaccessible spots that were identified in the beneficial design survey. We are looking at putting some of these critical repairs in paving projects to help absorb some costs and make it more streamlined, less neighborhood disturbance where possible, and just generally a more efficient process. We're continuing to avoid large contracts like we do with all these sidewalk repairs. The big thing is each repair location is unique. They're very time intensive, and a larger contract would ultimately diminish that repair quality. As I mentioned, phase 8 will be the end of next year using this critical repair list. At that time, to prepare for phase 9 in fall of 2024, we should probably start rethinking the prioritization criteria at some point, either late next year or early 2024, and move away from, the critical repair list will be for the most part fixed up. So we have this data set, and it'd be kind of, we will need to rethink how we want to prioritize sidewalk repairs using the data and commission's criteria. These critical repairs, as I mentioned, they'll be wrapped up 2023. We'll have a full citywide shaving cycle done by 2025. We have another sidewalks scheduled for spring 2026. We do it every 5 years, but we are thinking about moving it up a year just so it comes right off the shaving cycle. So once we've kind of gotten the city in a much better shape, we can have a fresh survey go in and help us get a good set of data immediately after that. With all that being said, my recommendations tonight is to approve the phase 6 repair locations as required. Everyone on that list, the phase 6 list, has been notified of this meeting. And then our second recommendation is to conditionally approve this schedule that we've put forth and the remaining critical repair locations. We will still come forward to commission prior to the phase 7 and phase 8 construction authorization with a memo, with repair locations, progress update, funding, budget update. And this is also to meet the criteria that we need to notify the property owners before their commission meeting regarding when they're chosen for sidewalk repairs. We could have theoretically notified the phase 7 and 8 addresses, but we felt since it was so far out, we didn't want to, start talking to them until it's closer to the authorization cycle. And just kind of, just to clarify, so we're on the same page in terms of process, the paving repairs, they won't be using the sidewalk funding. They'll be using SB1 and other county funds. So we don't necessarily need to notify if they're being captured under those paving projects, we don't necessarily need to notify them of the commission meeting, and they don't need to go forward to any commission meeting. Those homeowners will be notified through the typical city construction process. And that's it. So I will open it up to questions.
Wow. Thank you for that detailed report. There's a lot of good information there. Let's start with commissioner questions.
Yeah, that's a lot of good information trying to digest. But a really quick one. Well, when you have a critical repair and that's obviously caused by some trees, are you gonna do some root barrier and do something to the roots, or you just pave over it and or shave it just for the time being?
So almost all these critical repair locations are by trees. The first thing we do is the forester reviews the tree, because if the tree is particularly unhealthy or unstable, we remove it and we replant it There's also, we consider removal if the sidewalk has been replaced previously in a reasonable time frame, which has happened with some of these repairs in the past. Then we seek removal and we replace it with a tree better suited for the planter strip. Now, if we don't remove the trees, we have a couple strategies depending on the route. Again, this is kind of why each location is very time intensive, because they're all very unique. So the number one thing we do is we have a new city standard for curving around trees. So we give the tree more room always. Now, when we put the sidewalk back, we don't put a straight sidewalk in. We kind of curve around the tree. And if possible, we do a back of sidewalk curve to even allow for a larger curve around the tree to give it even more room for the root flare and trunk mass. When we remove the concrete, we do root pruning. We make sure, if appropriate, we do shave down some roots to make sure we can get that 4-inch pour. Starting with phase 5, we're putting a wire mesh in anywhere we see roots. So we're pouring back with a wire mesh at the bottom to help kind of, increase the strength of the concrete and hopefully prevent uplift. There's mixed studies, but generally it's been found that the wire mesh has improved that. You see less uplift if a wire mesh is present. That being said, the camphor trees, for example, have very large roots, and those are situations where we try, if possible, to kind of ramp over them and install the wire mesh and curve out the sidewalk. That's not always a great strategy because there's a lot of limitations. If we have driveways, if we have walkways to private properties, we can't always get a good conform into them. So we would like to take that approach more to, because that's generally the best way to keep the roots happy and have less uplift because we're working with what's there already. But that one only works in certain situations. So summary, yes, we do pruning, we do some root shaving, we put a wire mesh in, we give the tree extra space, and also if there's concrete up to the sides of the tree and what's next to the curb, we open it up so there's more planter space to encourage the roots to go along the curb line rather than into the property.
Thanks. Again, there's a lot of information. I appreciate it for the complexity.
Commissioner Jamadal.
I don't have any questions. I think this is great information. There's a lot there. It seems pretty systematic and rational. So thank you.
Yeah, I would concur. So you mentioned the Marin Avenue paving project. Is there a reason why or why not the sidewalks in the upper Marin area, I guess it's called, wouldn't get rolled into that repaving project?
We are considering that. It's more of a timeline thing that we don't exactly know the exact date of Marin Phase 2 versus the exact date of on the north side of Marin. Oh, sorry. Those are Zone 5 mostly
right.
repairs.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe our timeline for Marin Phase 2 might be before that. And if that's the case, they will be mostly covered under Marin paving. But if we do Phase 8 before Marin paving, then we'll cover it under the Sidewalk Program. It's just more, we don't know the exact timeline right now, so we didn't want to call it out. But we do anticipate if paving comes first, that will handle the project. And that'll actually free up a lot more sidewalk funds again. But as of right now, we're kind of looking at it to be repaired under Phase 8 with potential for the paving project to take care of it.
Great. So it's in the mix. Thank you. Appreciate it. Without seeing no additional commissioner questions, we'll open this up to public comment. And we already have at least one hand raised.
Jeremiah Pinguelo, please go ahead. You'll need to unmute Jeremiah.
You're still muted.
Well, while he's getting unmuted, I'll say if there's anybody else who wants to make public comment on this item, please use the raise your hand feature, either at the bottom of your screen on your computer, or I believe it's *9 on your phone.
Jeremiah, are you able to join us? Well, Mr. Chair, perhaps we would, if he's able to reconnect later, we'd give him a little extra time to comment at that time.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that if he reconnects. And I will put aside making a personal summary myself of his previous comments on this topic. So with that, are there commissioner comments or conclusions? Seeing none, I will say that I've certainly enjoyed watching the sidewalk program roll out over the years, and the maturity that has come to the project with the recent, or in my mind, recent data gathering and implementation of locational data. This is becoming a highly professional program, and I really appreciate that. It's exciting to see that we can get to a point of hopefully repairing all the high level or the most important repairs within our tax zone. Ignore the person in the background. I'm in agreement with the program, and I'm ready to move it forward. I need to mention that I have been in contact with Public Works personally, responding to one public request for a review of the sidewalk in front of their particular residents, and talking about how the sidewalk program goes forward in terms of supervising quality, and also looking at after we deal with the tree root issues, what comes up next, and what is being seen, what might make the most sense to look at next. So I may be back with more information to the commission on that later. But in the meantime, I'm happy to go along with this program and recommend it to City Council, and would request a motion from the other commissioners. Perhaps Commissioner Pang would take a turn.
Yeah, I would like to make a motion to approve the Phase 6 repair location and conditionally approve the remaining critical repair locations and the 2022 to 2023 repair schedule.
And we have a second from Commissioner Javental. Ms. Plaus, could you do a roll call vote?
Yes, Commissioner Javental.
Aye.
Commissioner Peng.
Yes.
Chair McCroskey.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Terrific. Thank you so much for the presentation and all the data, and we look forward to seeing the progress. And that will move us on to item number 5.3.
Yes, we have our Civic Spark Fellow, Johnny Manhennett, here to give us a presentation about shared scooters, micromobility. And we're really happy to have him come to this commission meeting and talk about one of his passions before he finishes up his Civic Spark year with us.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, all commissioners here, for having me this evening. I'm excited to share with you a bit about the local initiatives that have moved forward recently as it relates to micromobility in some of our neighboring cities here in Alameda County, so that we may also have a discussion this evening about the potential adoption of an ordinance or a permitting system for shared scooters and other similar devices in Albany. With that, I think we can pull up the slides and just dive in. This evening, I'll be presenting to you on both regulations implemented by both Emeryville and Berkeley, and do a little compare and contrast to see what approaches we think would work best for Albany, with the understanding that likely operator interest in Albany would hinge on having a permit to operate in Berkeley, given the preponderance of trips that would likely take place between our two cities. As far as I can tell, the slides are not up. Is that?
Yeah, we can't see your slides yet.
Oh, my apologies. I can pull that up myself. I was under the incorrect impression that they were already available.
Sorry, can you share them? Or I can if necessary.
If you have them up already, Michelle, that would be wonderful. And if not, I'm working to grab them myself.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have them up right now, but.
Then I'll just take one moment to do so. Once again, sorry for the delay.
Does he have the permission to share the slides at this moment?
I should.
Okay.
All right. I think I've located them. Yes. Thank you everyone for your patience. I'll be sharing my screen now.
I don't see you as a co-host.
I think the presentation is now up.
Okay.
There we go.
We can see it.
Fantastic. Glad to hear that. Okay.
Could you please switch to, I'm sorry, could you
No.
please switch to a slide view instead of the?
Yes,
the
I'm
current
working to do so at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
No problem at all. I apologize for the speed of my laptop, everyone. All right, here we go. So a bit of a background on the idea for moving forward with this project. Albany last had micromobility come to town with dockless classic pedal bikes in late 2017 and early 2018, at the same time as they were rolled out across the wider urban East Bay region. These were predominantly operated, at least at first, by the company Lime, which today has its main market in the shared electric scooter market. Micromobility is again interested in returning to this area. There are currently 3 operators present in Berkeley, which is the maximum number allowed under their permitting system, and there are 4 in Emeryville. Micromobility has the potential to significantly improve last mile options from more traditional transportation options and substitute short distance car journeys. As for permitting, this is a way in which Emeryville and Berkeley have differed fairly significantly, and that in Berkeley, they set a maximum of 3 operators allowed, and those were chosen by staff with input. And each of those operators also has an assigned vehicle cap that is attached to their permit, relating to the number of vehicles of different types they're allowed to put on city streets. For one operator, that's 250 vehicles, and for the other 2 operators, that's 500. Emeryville, while it has a permitting system, has no operator nor vehicle cap. Emeryville's permit cost is flat rate. That means that once their permit has been approved, they're free to place as many vehicles on city streets as they please. And Berkeley's is flat rate, but there's an additional annual fee of $64 for each vehicle. The way that I see that this could potentially be complicated in our jurisdictions is that vehicles that they may nominally register to Albany could end up in Berkeley or vice versa. But that hasn't yet become an issue because Albany and Berkeley don't yet have shared trips. As to parking regulations, Emeryville operators must maintain at least 1 rebalancing node per each 30 vehicles that operate in the city. A node is decided, its location is not specified in the city code, though it's understood that staff work with companies to establish ideal spaces for rebalancing vehicles so that they're always in desired opportunity sites. And it's up to the operator to maintain that rebalancing node or corral once it's been determined the locations. Emeryville also requires that all vehicles be rebalanced if they've not been used in any 72-hour period. Otherwise, the city will rebalance them or will remove them from the street, impound them at operator expense. So it does keep the onus on companies to ensure that vehicles are being placed productively and aren't sitting in unproductive spaces greater than 3 days. Both cities, Emeryville and Berkeley, established that operators must be available to be reached 24/7 to address concerns and must respond to any improperly parked vehicle within 3 hours of notice, regardless of time of day. This is a way to ensure that accessibility isn't greatly impeded, and when it is, its notice is promptly issued and addressed. As for employment requirements, this is a feature that's unique to Berkeley as far as I'm aware. I don't know of any other city, even beyond Emeryville, that has instituted this regulation, though that could come down to my own lack of information. But Berkeley does stipulate that 2 of its 3 dockless operating permits be granted to companies who use internal employees as opposed to independent contractors. So they do hire their own employees, and this is to ensure high road employment and job and wage stability. The 3rd operator permit was not required to do this, but was reserved for an operator that provided non-traditional scooters, such as those that are provided by VO, which allow for users to sit down. And so that permit was taken by VO. Its other 2 operators do hire their own employees. As to the questions of vehicle availability, both Berkeley and Emeryville require operators to provide assistive devices upon request with advanced reservation. These often take the form of electric tricycles, but there are a number of different models in the field of assisted devices to ensure that these systems allow for operability by those with mobility impairments. Berkeley mandates that all chosen operators must maintain at least 50 active vehicles in the city at any given time. So 50 is their floor, their cap, depending on permit, is 250 or 500. And this is to ensure usability of the system. Given the size of Berkeley, if there were to be fewer than 50 vehicles active in the fleet, it wouldn't provide for enough of a network effect to become a meaningful transportation option for many city residents. Berkeley also requires at least 50% of all active vehicles to be located in an equity priority community at any given time. Fortunately for Berkeley, that includes its greatest neighborhoods of transit dependence and of households without car ownership. Both cities also require that operators provide and market at their cost a low-income discount program and provide in their quarterly reporting data the use and increase in participation in those programs quarter over quarter. Now, as to safety, Berkeley requires operators to provide low or no-cost helmets to riders who ask for and reserve them. Berkeley and Emeryville require all rides be taken exclusively in the road or on bike paths and never on sidewalks. Both cities require that operators must ensure vehicles are parked safely by each user and take responsibility for relocating any vehicles obstructing accessibility. This usually takes the form of mandating that to finish a ride in the app, that users must take a photo of their vehicle parked so that if there is a violation in accessibility of that parking spot, that the operator has an opportunity to address who improperly parked that vehicle and cite them for it, since there would be a cost to that operator to rebalance that vehicle. Both cities also have vehicle speed capped at 15 miles an hour. So this was just a quick introduction into 5 of the most important components and distinguishing features of regulation in the 2 neighboring cities who have operators that would likely be interested in coming to Albany. At this time, El Cerrito does not have an ordinance or permitting system in place, though we expect that if they were to come to Albany, many of our riders would be interested in using it to access BART in El Cerrito and shop just over the border. So I hope that this has been a bit informative as to the ways in which scooter regulation is evolving. It's not the same madness that we saw a few years ago, and we look forward to answering any questions you may have about preliminarily considering micromobility regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting. You mentioned El Cerrito. What can you tell us about Richmond?
At this time, Richmond is forging its own path with shared mobility. They have instituted their own municipally run docked bike share system. However, it's unaffiliated with Bay Wheels. Richmond does not currently have any dockless vehicles operating as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Commissioner Peng, please.
Hi, thanks for the work. I have 2 questions. So as far as I know, Wheelride has already applied a business license, tried to apply a business license in Albany. And based on previous, I actually asked Justin, Mr. Freed earlier, if we have any regulations. At that time, he said no. And then as long as the vendor apply for a business license, it will work. So are we waiting? So are we saying like we stop it and then wait for this regulation to pass before we issue any license to vendor? That's my first question. Second is, I think it will be a very confusing if we have anything major different from all the regulations in Berkeley, given people ride up and down the street, Solano. So do you see any problem if we just apply the same requirement as Berkeley to Albany? Because the only thing I can see is that I don't think there's any equity priority communities in Albany. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I believe that's correct, yes.
Right, so yeah, so I would like to hear your opinion about just adopting whatever is in Berkeley to Albany.
Yeah, as to I'm going to defer to either Jeff or Michelle for your first question, if that's all right. But to address your second question, I don't see any issue in us copying the vast majority of requirements put in place by Berkeley. Where I do see challenges, though, there are a few things with which I take issue where I just find that I think it would hinder use in Albany, given that our market is not as dense and does not have as many travel draws as Berkeley does. I think we're a lower priority market for some. And if we were to institute a fee per vehicle, in addition to an annual permitting fee to operate, I think that would serve as a perverse incentive for operators to balance fewer vehicles in the city to avoid those permitting costs per vehicle. Whereas I think the experience that we had previously with dockless bikes about 4 years ago was that there were too few in the city to make the system usable for the majority of residents. So I would argue that while it would be unproductive for us to charge a per vehicle fee, it only makes sense in Berkeley's case because it was a competitive market to get the permit to operate that they had it capped at 3. Emeryville does not cap the operators, and because of that also does not cap the number or does not charge per vehicle.
Yeah, thanks. Personally, I agree. We shouldn't make it economically discouragement for the vendor.
And if I may, Commissioner Pena, with respect to your first question, the business, we would not hold up the issuance of a business license. In fact, a business license is essentially a tax. It's not a regulatory tool for us. So we would go ahead and do that. But we would, at some, if somebody were to come in Monday morning or something, tomorrow morning, we would issue the business license. We should get these regulations in place in the next few months due to some litigation that occurred in Oakland and perhaps other places regarding the accessibility regulations. And basically the best practice now is that we adopt something so that we have parameters and procedures if somebody dumps one of these things on the sidewalk and it creates a hazard or a barrier to someone within this that needs some accessibility assistance.
Thanks, Bond, Ms. Bond. Then my question is, the city has to sign any like service agreement with the vendor or on top of giving them just a business license? Can you shed some light on some procedure?
So right now, there is no agreement that's associated with the business license. If we, or when we adopt these regulations, then we would apply our new regulations to any provider in the city. And at that time, we would have to decide whether we need an agreement or we simply say to the provider, here are the rules, whether you like them or not. In the sense, like a lot of the building code or many of our municipal codes, there's no agreement in place. It's just, here's the requirement, period.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Great. Commissioner Javadal?
I don't have any questions. I'll wait for comments.
Great. I'm curious to know how UC Berkeley treats these scooters in Berkeley.
My understanding is at the moment, the direct campus is geofenced off with vehicles not allowed onto campus. They're parked all around it. But given the density of pedestrians on campus during most of the daytime, I think that at least at the moment, these vehicles are they're programmed not to operate within the boundary of the central section of campus. I do know that the campus is interested in continuing to advance alternative transportation, but at this time, those rides are not permitted.
Does that mean UC Village will be under the same restriction, geofenced off?
That was my next question.
I'm unsure if it would be or not, because there are also university properties that aren't bounded by Oxford, Bancroft, and Hearst that still allow for these scooters to operate adjacent.
My understanding is that it's just the campus itself.
I believe it's just the central campus.
As well as the other schools within Berkeley, the high school and whatnot. But I think University Village probably wouldn't fall under that.
I guess that would be up to UC, and I'm
Right.
guessing that any regulations that we implement would not be applicable to that property.
That's likely true.
Interesting. Okay. Do you have any idea of? It sounds like you're suggesting that we just deal with the basics because we're a smaller city and we want to attract micromobility. Do you have any information on how other smaller cities have dealt with the interaction with micromobility companies?
Yes, I was trying to use Emeryville as a peer comparison, given their population is about 2/3 of ours, though I do understand they have larger trip generators and they're a pretty large regional employment hub. I think that Emeryville's regulations make micromobility an attractive, forgive me, I believe that their regulations are attractive to operators. I think that they help foster productive conversations with city staff, given the input that may be received on rebalancing nodes. which we would be able to advise on if we chose to require those rebalancing nodes. But other than that, they're fairly permissive.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, for all of the commissioners' reference as well, Emeryville's ordinances as adopted, as well as Berkeley's proposed ordinances with its staff report that was adopted, were included as attachments to this agenda.
Terrific. Do you know if, I'm sorry, I haven't read them in this detail. Do you know if Emeryville and Berkeley require the scooters to be parked away from street cleaning, scheduled street cleaning?
So vehicles are not to be parked in the street unless they're in a rebalancing node. And I believe that those are already, vehicles aren't ever to be parked in a street outside of a rebalancing node. And my understanding would be that the maintenance agreement of that rebalancing node with the city would have it such that the operator removes those vehicles at the time of street cleaning, though I can't say that for sure. That's something we could explore to put into our ordinance as it further develops with your feedback.
Also, do you have any information how Berkeley decided on the number? Like they have to be minimum of 50 per vendor at any given time, right? So how did they come up with the number?
Truthfully, I am not able to tell you how they chose that 50 was the floor. I think that I'm not sure. Truth, I couldn't tell you. I know that if they have 3 permits that are each setting a floor of 50, then you would have a minimum of 150 vehicles active, which is 1 per 1,000 residents in the city vaguely. Maybe that was the metric by which they established that floor, but I don't have data on that.
Thanks. Yeah, I think if we are gonna put any numbers on it, that would be one of the mass game we have to play.
All right. Seeing no further commissioner questions, let's go ahead and open up to public comment.
Okay, Jeremiah Garrett-Nguello, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff Bond. Thank you, Chair McCroskey. Thank you, Commission. And thank you, staff, for presenting. I really appreciate this. You know, I was at the North Berkeley BART station the other day, and I decided to ride my bike to and from work to the Port of Oakland. So got on the West Oakland BART station, and I got off at North Berkeley, and I took this beautiful trail back through towards Albany. It was all downhill. It was beautiful. I saw these scooters. I forget the name. I did take a photo, hoping that I would send it to you. I just haven't got around to it yet. I do apologize. There's a company in Berkeley, and they're kind of mopeds. So when we talk about scooters, sometimes I think scooters as in mopeds, or, you know, the Vespa sort of scooter. And then when I think of scooter as just a public attendee, when I hear the word scooter, sometimes I think of the little, you know, like the Razor scooters, but the electronic ones, right? The ones with 2 wheels and, you know, it's got handlebars. Everybody's using them, kind of thing. So I don't know. There's multiple definitions of scooters, and I think it'd be great to have multiple options. I did remember you just said on one of them, sit down and ride. And so there's a sit down and ride moped, Vespa, scooter in Berkeley. And those ones are really neat. And I think there's even a discount if you're got a job or working or something. I forget how it goes. But then there's also the other scooters that, you know, like the electronic Razor scooters kind of thing. That's how I'm explaining them. I hope you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so they're all great. First of all, well, hopefully they're all electric. I wouldn't really like the gas powered scooters, even though they are pretty fuel efficient for the most part. I do think Albany there is a demand. I remember talking about there might not be a demand in Albany. You know, there's a lot of people here, and I foresee a lot of students riding little scooters to and from school. I really want to see more of this, and I want this to go through. I have seen a lot of people riding their bicycles and scooters on Solano on the sidewalk, and it's kind of dangerous. But you know, and then regarding helmets, does the scooter come with a helmet? You know, sort of thing. Is it attached? You know, it's come with a helmet for safety. But I'm all for this. I think it's great, and I really think we need this. So keep up the good work, guys. This is a great agenda item.
Chairman Krosky, I'm not seeing anyone else at the moment.
Thank you for those comments. And I do believe we're talking about only electric scooters at this point.
That's right. If I could address the other point made about the operator, I believe that the scooter operator that the public commenter was referring to was a vehicle, the one on which you can sit, provided by VIO, which is the company that applied for the business license in Albany.
Okay. Are there age requirements?
It depends. Some require that you be 18. Some require that you have a driver's license. You get it would be our. I think we could craft our ordinance to be either of those.
So Berkeley and Emeryville have some requirement, and it just differs a little.
I would need to check back on that. That's not something of which I made note in preparing this presentation.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Further comments from commissioners? Commissioner Javadal.
Thank you. Let's see. First, I'll offer a piece of information relative to, in addition to the scooters, whether they're sit scooters, stand scooters, all limited to 15 miles an hour. There is another company in Berkeley, Revel, that has electric mopeds, which basically follows all the regulations of a motorcycle. It has to drive in the traffic lane, cannot drive in a bike lane, cannot drive on a bike path, travels at traffic speeds, obviously, so not capped at 15 miles an hour per state law, helmets required, etc. So that's not what we're discussing tonight. So I'll just leave that one there. I think that I agree with the recommendation that we try to sort of match regulations in the vicinity, just for honestly simplicity. Riders don't have to learn a new set of rules everywhere they go. So one of the rules in Berkeley, of course, is at the end of a ride, the scooter has to be locked to a bike rack or other approved location. And to the extent that we may require operators to pay a fee, it makes sense for that fee to first cover any administrative expense, but then go towards expansion of our bike racks in the city. So install new bike racks where these devices can be locked up, or ask the operator to install bike racks in locations we designate. I think either one of those is probably a fine approach to take, and probably subject to a little more discussion to see what's considered feasible. And then I will take a sort of a step farther beyond that of, where do we put bike racks? Some of our sidewalks on Solano have limited space for bike racks. There may be places, whether on Solano or as we look at people taking these scooters from the bus stop or the BART station, whether El Cerrito or North Berkeley, and riding to their home, we don't have a lot of public bike racks in neighborhoods, and maybe not a lot of space. Maybe we might have some homeowners who would say, I'm happy having a bike rack in the parking strip outside of my house, which is part of the public right of way. Or, as we mentioned earlier in this meeting, if we're going to daylight intersections, we could create on-street bike corrals in those setbacks from the intersection. Bikes and scooters are pretty easy to see past or through or over as compared to cars. And I think that that would not be a bad way to go. That might give us a location in the neighborhood so they're not getting changed to trees or other locations that are not really well suited. So that's a thought, a suggestion for something that we might want to pursue to provide good places to lock these up at the end of a ride, or for the operator to deploy them, because we recognize that both happen. The operator puts them out, someone uses them, and they go wherever they want to go. And they would like to have somewhere close to their destination to lock up. Otherwise, I think we run the risk of them locking them inappropriately. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just add that I can think of a couple locations where there are daylighted areas that regularly get motorists using them as sort of temporary parking. And there's a reason in these cases that the area was daylighted, so cars are not blocking some other feature like the bike lane or backing into an intersection to get out of the parking space. And putting a couple of racks there could serve quite a few purposes. Commissioner Peng.
I don't have any further comment. I really like the idea by Commissioner Javendale about the use the space where we do the red curbing, right? That's a really good idea.
Great. Yeah, I certainly support the commissioner's comments and moving forward with adopting some form of regulation. If we're not moving in concert with El Cerrito, I think we're going to need a relocation node at the stream there at Cerrito Creek on the Greenway, as people trying to go to the BART station, unfortunately. So my hope is that El Cerrito will hopefully be moving along as we do and provide that opportunity. Albany hopefully is attractive for one reason, because it's kind of a path to other places. It's a place to move through in some ways. So hopefully that will add value to attracting micromobility to our somewhat small community. Well, great. With that, we've submitted our comments for discussion, and this item is not due for a resolution. Thank you so much, staff, for your presentation. Thank you for your work this year, and good luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate meeting you all and having the chance to present this evening.
Fabulous. Fabulous. All right. With that, switch back to my agenda, pardon me. And we move on to item number 5.4, the update on Draft Parklet Program Guidelines.
Yes, that is me.
Great.
Bringing parklets back to you once again. I know you guys can't get enough of them. Neither can we. So since we last spoke to you about the parklets, we have presented to both the Economic Development Commission, our committee, and the Planning and Zoning Commission, and have received feedback from both of those groups. And the guidelines have shifted a little bit since the last time you saw them and made a recommendation. So we wanted to bring them back to you to let you see the changes that have been made, and for you to either re-recommend with those new changes or to recommend something else if you so desire. So I won't go into all the detail again about the guidelines. I'll just kind of hit the highlights of the changes that have been made here. The first one is regarding parklet spaces. So we still have the guideline that parklets can either be 1 to 2 parallel parking spaces or 2 to 3 angled spaces. But the addition that's been made is that for those who are applying for 3 spaces, that will default to a review by the Planning and Zoning Commission to determine whether they can use all 3 spaces. So that's a change. We also have the recommendation by the Economic Development Committee that if more than 40% of the parking spaces on a given block are being used by parklets, then only 2-space parklets can be allowed from that point on. So that actually was brought up, I think, at a previous, at our last meeting, we discussed with you all about these parklet guidelines, and the Transportation Commission determined not to recommend that and to have EDC have that recommendation on their own. So we've kept that distinction, and if you'd like to keep that distinction going forward, we can present those varying recommendations to council, or you could choose to go along with this EDC recommendation as it is here. Another minor change is signage. This is really just a change to the wording of signage prohibition so that it's only prohibited on the perimeter of the parklet structure, and it would be okay within a parklet. And this was really changed because there does need to be some signage within the parklet, probably, especially instructional signage, like where the public seats are, or, how to dispose of your, various waste. Instructional types of signage would be allowed. So that's another minor change. And then the Economic Development Committee also wanted to have some more guidance in terms of materials and aesthetics for the parklets. So we added this guideline or requirement that the perimeter barrier materials be made of metal, wood, or another type of natural material as a sort of place to start with aesthetics. And that if a parklet owner wanted to use some kind of alternative material that didn't fall into those to that camp, that it would go to the Planning and Zoning Commission for review. So that's a major change that's been added there. And then we've also added that plant materials and lighting are encouraged, but this wouldn't be required. So, that's 2 things that would be going to Planning and Zoning for review: the materials, if not one of these natural ones, and then also if they want to have 3 angled parking spaces. And that brings us to the probably most significant change, which is related to perimeter barriers. So the last time we brought this to you, the perimeter barrier requirement was that there be a wall or railing of 36 to 42 inches around the entire parklet. And then there would also be a substantial barrier able to withstand 250 pounds of force. And that substantial barrier, which could be a planter or a K-rail or something else, could be incorporated into the wall or railing structure, or they could be 2 separate components. So Planning and Zoning recommended that we shift that so that there would be a requirement that there would be that same wall or railing, 36 to 42 inches high, that's able to withstand 200 pounds of lateral force, and a separate substantial barrier would not be required. So really just kind of combining those 2 pieces into one, and then changing the weight to 200 pounds of force. And the reason that they changed it was because a standard deck railing, like you'd find in a backyard, has the requirement that it be able to withstand 200 pounds of force. That's kind of a part of the code. So they thought it'd be easier to kind of combine it with that already existing regulation. And then just leave that as the only barrier requirement. And what this would mean in reality, it would really be there mainly to prevent people who are inside of the parklet from walking or falling into the roadway. So that 200 pounds is essentially enough to keep a person in. It's not really designed to keep a vehicle out. You know, it could create that visual barrier for drivers to help create distinction and prevent collisions. But if there is a collision into that barrier, it's not going to do much to stop a car. It's still something, you know, it's more than a 6-inch curb. But again, it's not really with the intention of providing a lot of protection against some sort of, you know, drunk driver who's speeding into the parklet or something like that. So I want to just take a minute to talk about K-rails, since, you know, K-rails have come up a few times as we've been going through these different variations of barrier requirements, and to give you some context as you think through your recommendation. So there are a few different kinds of K-rails. There are plastic ones that can be filled with water and sand, and there's also concrete. And generally speaking, the water-filled K-rails weigh about 170 pounds per linear foot. The sand-filled are about 350 pounds per linear foot, and cement is about 390. So this is quite a bit heavier. And oftentimes they're bolted into pavement to provide some extra strength and protection. That's, you know, for instance, along a highway when you see the median barriers there, or around a construction zone. That's usually what you'll have as a cement or sand-filled K-rail that's bolted into the pavement. And, you know, they wouldn't be stopping an errant vehicle in its tracks. You know, it's not going to provide 100% protection by any means. But they would definitely limit the damage if we did see a collision. They'd slow down the car, and, you know, they'd prevent some injuries. And, you know, in the case of a minor collision, say someone kind of side-swiping the parklet while they're driving slowly, that could provide quite a bit of protection potentially. There are some costs to K-rails. The first one being, you know, financial cost. If someone were to completely surround a parklet with the plastic K-rails, it would cost about $3,500. For concrete, it would be about $4,000 plus handling, because you would actually need a forklift to be moving these very heavy concrete K-rails around. So that could be quite a bit more potentially. And then there's also a cost in terms of square footage. They're usually about 2 feet wide on the bottom. And so again, if you had that full perimeter, that would take up about 1/3 of the square footage in a parklet with, you know, with 2 angled spaces. So it's a significant amount potentially. And then finally, Planning and Zoning Commission, one of the comments they made in regards to aesthetics was that they didn't really like the construction look, in particular of the orange plastic K-rails. So I think if we were going to require K-rails as part of the perimeter barrier, I think Planning and Zoning would prefer it if we could think about maybe painting them or covering or some way, or potentially using planters instead. So that's just another thing to think about in terms of K-rails. So with all of that in mind, we do recommend that the Commission recommends these updated guidelines as recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission, including their new guideline of having that single barrier that is the 36 to 42 inch wall, able to withstand 200 pounds of lateral force. And we're happy to answer any questions and talk through all those things in more detail if you'd like.
Thank you. And thanks for the very clear redacted version that you put up. That was a big help. Commissioner, questions?
Really quick one. Wondering, should the jurisdiction of reviewing the parklet fall under Transportation Commission or Planning and Zoning Commission? I know it's a structure, but it's within the right of way, right?
Yeah, I think it could be argued. either way. The particular thing that was going to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission for review was the materials being used and their aesthetic properties, which makes it more under the Planning and Zoning Commission purview. The question of review by Planning and Zoning for 3 spaces rather than 2, I think is maybe a little bit more up for debate. If you wanted to, you could recommend that it come to transportation for review.
I see.
If I may add to that, add to Michelle's answer to you, I mean, one of the ways we sometimes think about the difference between various commissions is you as the Transportation Commission really look at the function of the roadway and the mobility. And in a way, we're taking these areas out of mobility and into the economic base and of the city, and that's traditionally the Planning Commission. But it's very much a gray area. So if you have a different perspective on it, that would be terrific. That's just kind of where we started from.
I see. I just have a question. I think if the part of the review already falls naturally to planning and zoning, I think it'd be more efficient to have them handle all of this. That's just my personal opinion.
Great, and we want to hear that, but we should probably try and save those opinions for after the public comment portion of for the future. Thank you. Any other questions from Commissioner Peng? Great. Commissioner Javendal.
I have no questions.
Fair enough. Great. So do we expect that, and this is possibly a planning and zoning question more so than for us, do we expect that any of the roofs are going to block signs of establishments, or do they currently? Like names of establishments above the front door?
We have received at least one complaint about that, and I think it's very possible that they could do that in a variety of instances.
Okay.
It would only be blocking it from certain viewpoints, of course, not entirely, but.
Sure. Great. Yeah, it's interesting. We had a discussion last time about barriers, and I think for myself, I was thinking that we were talking about barriers that would block a vehicle to some extent, and it's pretty clear that for the most part we were not, so that's the decision to be made, and I'll leave that for later. If that's the end of commissioner questions, I'm going to pass it on to public comment.
Hey, Jeremiah Garrett-Pinguello, please go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you, everybody, once again. Yeah, I remember when this topic first came up, when we were first starting to do outdoor dining in these parklets. I mentioned, I'm a longshoreman at the Port of Oakland, and we use K-rails. I remember a few people didn't know what K-rails were. And I was happy that everybody got educated on what a K-rail is. And those can support way more than 200 pounds. Hey, you know what? Could we get some data on how many pounds it would take to push it over? That I don't know, but I'm kind of curious now that we're talking about it. I was going to say 2,000 pounds. We use what's called a heavy forklift to move those. It's a bigger version of your normal everyday forklift. It's called a heavy lift. And we move those all day long. Sometimes they're actually half of a K-rail. If you don't need a full size of a K-rail, they could be broken down to bits and pieces, a quarter of a K-rail, half a K-rail, and you can kind of adjust it how you want it. those save lives, especially at the Port of Oakland. We have truck drivers run into those all the time. And myself, to tell you the truth, I park behind a K-rail because I feel safe parking my vehicle behind a K-rail. It depends on which job I take. Some days I take a security job and I'm just observing, reporting. And so I like to post up somewhere at an intersection, you know, and those K-rails are so safe. And oh my gosh, I'm so glad we're talking about this. Okay, I just thought of a great idea. Okay, planning and zoning is always about their, what do they call it? Design review. So of course they're going to comment on what it looks like, right? Because they're all about design review. So with the design review, how about this? How about we turn it into art in public places? We can get artists or people to draw on the K-rail. I think that's a great idea. That's hitting like 2 or 3 agenda items with one go. You got art in public places, public safety. I think that's the best solution. I mean, really, sure, the construction grade doesn't look good, but it's safe and you could paint them. And the orange ones, what if we had a lane splitter pizza, right? And then what if that orange construction thing was part of their design of their business? You know, it was meant to look construction. So that kind of would look good too. So let's do the K-rails, the cement ones, please, and we can have art in public places to paint them. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Not seeing any other requests for public comment, we'll bring it back to the commissioners. Commissioner Peng.
I understand the K-rail can provide a lot of safety and peace of mind, but I do want to bring people's attention to the fact that it will take 1/3 of the space that's operatable. And also, I think, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, we have to decide if we want to keep our suggestion regarding that, you know, you can only do 2 space if the street is 40% occupied by the parklet.
Right now, that recommendation has been made by the Economic Development Committee. The Transportation Commission did not recommend that.
So, okay, so when we submit to the city council, can we say that's from the Economic Development Council, but our Transportation Commission decide, you know, not suggest that? Can we put both information to the city council?
Yeah, absolutely. You could recommend all of the same guidelines except for that or whatever else. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Commissioner Javadil.
Well, yeah, as far as the Economic Development Commission's recommendations, I don't feel very strongly, but whatever, you know, my fellow commissioners would prefer, I'm happy to support there. I do agree that, you know, if parklets are reviewed, the fewest stops at commissions would be the best. So if planning and zoning is going to be reviewing part of it, they should review the whole thing. I think that's fine. We have weighed in on what we think the transportation needs are from a, you know, categorical perspective, and that becomes part of the regulation. That's good enough. We don't need to review every single one. With respect to the kind of the question about around signs that came up, personally, I would be okay with being flexible about signage on the perimeter of the parklet if the parklet is blocking the signage of the restaurant or other building, that this would sort of make up for that. So I would hope that we'd be flexible around that, but I don't think that needs to, you know, be critical at this point. It could always be changed later if we need to. Just a thought there. Other than that, yeah, I would feel more comfortable sitting behind a K-rail. I don't think we need to mandate it because, the space has to be figured out in a way that works. Where there's angle parking, the K-rail probably takes up substantially less than a third of the space. But for parallel parking space, there's not much left. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to continue to split from the Economic Development Commission on the issue of proportion of usage. I'd also like to point out that one of the things we talked about at this commission before was short-term parklets. And I would actually like to make an exception to the 2-3 spaces rule for parklets that might be implemented for, say, less than 2 months. Just to make it more straightforward and under staff purview, potentially instead of planning and zoning. If all of the parklets are going to planning and zoning, that creates quite a hurdle for a temporary parklet. And so I guess the full divergence that I would recommend would be for parklets with a duration less than 2 months. They would be allowed to be under staff review and use up to 3 spaces, 3 diagonal spaces, and 2 parallel spaces. I think we've agreed, or I agree with staff that once the parklet issue is kind of resolved here by council, it's out of our purview, and the signage issue is something that's out of our purview for the most part, and will be under the review of planning and zoning anyway. So I think that's a comment that they can resolve in the course of their own deliberations. So let's let that one go. And as far as safety, there's nothing in these regulations that it asks for natural materials, but I don't believe it's requiring them. And certainly with planning and zoning review, they could opt to favor the use of a more substantial barrier and require that it be decorated appropriately. So if we're not inclined to require a stronger barrier, which most municipalities do not seem to be doing, then I think we kind of let that one go as well. Any further discussion? Anybody willing to hazard a motion? Please.
I would go ahead and move that we recommend council approve the Parklet program with the modification that we don't agree with the Economic Development Commission's recommendation on the 40% constraint.
And I just want to add to the motion, we also want to say add the exception of the temporary parklet, right? With the duration less than 2 months, will have the ability to, use up to 3 angled parking space and 2 parallel space without going to planning and zoning commission. And if that's what you agree, I second that motion.
I accept that, yes.
Okay. I second.
Terrific. Then I think we're done with discussion and we'd like to take a roll vote.
Wonderful. Commissioner Javadal?
Aye.
Commissioner Peng?
Yes.
Chair McCroskey?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you very much.
It's so straightforward with 3 people. And the public comment, of course. Can't leave that out. Great. With that, we are past 9:30, but we have announcements and pretty much announcements and future agenda items left. Could I get a motion to go until 9:45?
So moved.
Yeah. Okay.
Moved and seconded, raise hands to agree. Carries. Moving on. So that takes us to item number 6, announcements.
Yes, I have 2 short announcements. The first is related to our active transportation plan signing and striping. Striping was completed earlier this month, including bicycle boulevard stencils on Washington, Jackson, and part of Talbot, and the remainder of the bike lanes on Posen. And wayfinding signage will be installed soon in early August. The construction alerts page on the public works section of the city website continues to provide the latest information on active projects. So that is the place to go for all of your updates. And my second announcement is related to...
If I may, I would like to say that it's been wonderful to see a lot of fresh, clean sharrows, bike lane sharing indications popping up all over the city. It's nice to see those reinforced.
Yes, we like to see it too. Yes, my second announcement is regarding the National Night Out. Join us for another year of National Night Out, celebrating neighborhood safety with block parties throughout Albany. Additional information and the link to register your block on the city website is at albanyca.org/NNO. You can also follow links on the calendar page for August 2nd. That's when the National Night Out will be, and you can register through there as well.
Terrific. Do any commissioners have other related transportation announcements? Seeing none, we'll move on to our final item, future agenda items. And we are expecting a break here in August. We'll resume in September. And then we have 3 meetings. And then September, October. No, we have 2 meetings, September, October. We don't know when we might return to in-person unless there's an update from staff. And then we usually combine the November, December meetings. So we have just 3 meetings left in the year. And if we are meeting in person, we might have our own party at the November meeting, which we've done traditionally. And I'll just remind you, as I often do this time of year, that we will be looking for a new chair in the new year. Thank you. Anything further from staff?
We have no information on when we'll be going back in person yet.
Understood. Fair enough. Well, thank you, Ms. Plaus, for leading us this evening and stepping in for Mr. Freed.
Pleasure.
Good job. And with that, thank you all and look forward to seeing you again in September.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.